Everyone, welcome to today's video. We're going to talk about valuation methods in the real world of multifamily apartment buildings. So the key words there, in the real world, you may think you know valuation methods for multifamily, that 2 to 4 units are direct comp methods, and then 5+ units use cap rates. That is what we're told in theory. But it's a different story in the real world, and it can actually differ depending on the market you're in and the kinds of products you're looking at. So we're going to dive into that a little bit today here. First, I want to go through the main valuation methods that we use in multifamily apartment buildings. First one is direct comps. So pretty straightforward, just like you would comp a house, a single family house, typically used in 2 to 4 units, where you're looking for like to like comparisons. You're looking for similar bedroom counts, similar bathroom counts, similar condition, and typically used in lower unit buildings because there are comparisons available. Next one we have is price per unit. For those of you who have seen my previous videos, you know I may not be the biggest fan of price per unit on its own. And the example I like to use is you may have two properties right next door to each other. One may be a brand new construction 12 unit with massive 4 bedroom units inside. And next door to it is another 12 unit building, but this one is 100 years old, has a bunch of deferred maintenance, and is all tiny studios. Now, if you use price per unit on its own, you're going to run into some problems. So I don't like to use price per unit on its own, but it can be a useful tool depending on the size of the property, which we'll get into a bit. Cap rate. This is obviously a big one for multifamily apartment buildings where we're directly talking about cash flow and returns and the NOI as a ratio to the purchase price or the value of the property. And then the last one we have is price per square foot. So we'll talk about this one a little bit later on, but we're looking at the building as a whole and the rentable square feet and the amount of dollars we're paying per square foot. So I've broken up the number of units here. This is completely arbitrary. This is not necessarily to be taken as a gospel that at these junctures different weightings are used. But I do want to use it for illustrative purposes to show where you might use each of these valuation methods for each size property. So we'll start with the easiest one, 2 to 4 units. We're typically using mostly direct comps. So I've put it here 90% for direct comps, 10% for other. And I just left that 10% other just for something like cap rate, returns, maybe price per unit. So it's not all necessarily 90%. It's not all direct comps, but direct comps definitely make up the bulk of it. And remember, we're talking about the real world here. If you talk to an appraiser, it's going to be 100% direct comps. But we're talking about what other investors, what the market is saying, what they're using to compare different buildings. Obviously, when we're talking 2 to 4 units, we want to make sure that we're getting it pretty granular with direct comps. So we want to get the best comps that we can, similar bed counts, similar condition, similar size of place. And, like I said, it's effectively very similar to comping single family homes. We just have a variation on the number of units. Now we go to 5 to 18 units. Now again, the theory says 5+ units, we're using cap rate. Here I actually put a 50-50 split. And again, this is just rough. In your area, it might be higher towards price per unit. It might be higher towards cap rate. But you generally do see in the market investors talking about price per unit quite a bit in 15 to 18 units. Um, I personally like to use both of the metrics when looking at a potential investment property. Definitely the cap rate is important because that relates to the cash flow you're going to get, the end returns you're going to get on an investment property. But I also look at price per unit. How does this stack up uh, compared to other properties in an area? I don't want to be setting price per unit records in any area. That's not the kind of investor I am, and a lot of you may share that same sentiment. But if the price per unit is high, maybe we can look a little bit more granular and see why that is the case. Perhaps it is a new build with larger units than anything else in the neighborhood. And by that information, you could say, hey, maybe it is justified in paying that price per unit. So usually I like to use them in tandem, especially for these lower unit counts above 5 units. And it's important to know that it's what the market uses. What is typically the valuation of that metrics that other buyers and other investors use. Because if you're solely going off cap rate and everyone else uses, say, price per unit 100%, when you go to sell that property or refinance, there's going to be some issue there. There's going to be some discrepancies between what you believe the property is worth and what other investors think the property is worth. So you have to placate to what the wider investment community values and how they weight different metrics, say price per unit and cap rate. Now let's get into 19 to 50 units. And again, these are just rough numbers. Nothing special happens between 18 and 19 units. I just used it for illustrative purposes. But you can, I've broken down here cap rate 80% and price per unit 20%. So now we're putting more of an emphasis on cap rate the higher the unit count gets, and probably less emphasis on price per unit. So why is this? Once you start getting into the higher unit counts, return metrics definitely become very important. I have a saying that I heard once upon a time that I really liked is price per unit doesn't put food on the table, cap rate and cash flow and returns does. And so we're focusing more on cap rate and the return metrics of a property, and what we're really looking at is stability. And that's what we get with higher unit counts. Now, if you have a 6 unit and you have a single vacancy, that's like 17% of your revenue just wiped until you can find a replacement tenant. And so your cap rate, your NOI can fluctuate greatly the less units you have. Now, if you have a 200 unit property, if you have a vacancy or some other things happen in the property, it's unlikely to affect the overall cap rate and NOI of the investment. And so you get a lot more stability, and then therefore you can put a lot more weight on the numbers as they relate to cap rate. So you'll notice that as you do go up in unit counts, the cap rate does get more weighted. And we'll look at the 50 plus unit here. I just put 100%. If you look at these massive institutional transactions, they're trading 200, 300, 400 units sometimes in a single transaction. They're almost always just going off cap rate. They've got investors, they've got return metrics they need to hit. The price per unit doesn't really factor into it that much. And they may well be setting records for price per unit. And you may say, hey, they paid that much for these units when I could buy a 6 unit for the same price per unit. And that's incorrect logic because you've got completely different investors and completely different environments where really it's night and day between 6 units and say a 200 unit complex. So cap rate does get more heavily weighted the higher unit counts you go. That's what you need to take away from this. And it's not just cut and dry. 5+ units is cap rate, 2 to 4 units is direct comps. That's really what the moral of the story is here. Now, to find out in your own local market where the weightings are, you really need to talk to people and get a feel. And this is where investing can sometimes be more of an art than a science. You have to see what metrics people put emphasis on. If you have conversations with agents or investors or lenders and they're talking about, you hear price per unit thrown around quite a bit, then you know that sub-weighting has to be put on price per unit. What that weighting is case by case. But if you're in a market where all they talk about, even at 5 or 6 units, they talk about cap rate and nothing else, then you know the weighting is going to be more towards cap rate. The last thing we haven't talked about here is price per square foot. Now, price per square foot plays more into Class A luxury units, luxury buildings, I should say. And if you think about this logically, in Class C and Class B building areas, square footage isn't really a major factor. The types of tenant bases you have, especially in Class C, they're more worried about the bedrooms, number of bedrooms they have, and less so about total living space. And because of that, you have a lot of similar sized units compared to the bedroom count. So, for instance, you're not going to really see, 2,000 square foot studios, but you are going to see a lot of, say, 1,000 square foot one bedrooms. It could be plus or take 200 square feet, but they're more or less going to be the same. In Class A luxury buildings, you could definitely get a 3,000 square foot one bedroom, and you can have an 1,100 square foot one bedroom. So if you just compare bedroom counts, it's not going to be a great comparison. So we will see price per square foot used, especially in the luxury market. And that doesn't mean that we don't see the metric in Class B and Class C buildings, but more emphasis will be put in where we do have Class A luxury. So, bit of guidance there. Again, this is arbitrary. I've put these numbers out based on just some rough estimates of what I've seen. It definitely varies from market to market and the product type, but it should get you thinking. See what your market is like and how much weighting you should put to each metric because it is very important. It doesn't matter what you think is the correct metric or the right way of seeing it. It's what the market thinks. If the market thinks that they should emphasize cap rate, then you got to follow cap rate. If they think it's price per unit, you got to follow price per unit. If it's something like, I'm thinking of an extreme example, sunlight coming through, the amount of sunlight that comes through to each unit. If everyone in the community, in the investor pool, is basing their valuations based on sunlight and you're using cap rate, then there's going to be some discrepancy there when you go to sell. And of course, that's a silly example, but it goes to illustrate you have to be aware of what the market thinks. Otherwise, you're gonna be mispriced in a lot of cases. So that's it for today. Let me know if you have any questions on that. We will see you next week.